Hi, everybody. Chapter 2 is going to be looking at how we measure crime and victimization, not only here in the United States, but abroad as well. First of all, the case example here is about a massacre of 69 people that took place in Norway. And read about this one. This is interesting because um, it it really kind of talks about, I mean, when you look at this type of crime, how it can really, because they don't have a lot of crime like this, by the way, in Norway, how this type of mass crime can really not only affect the people that were there and who were victims, but really whole communities and make everybody feel unsafe, especially when something big like this happens. Think of 9/11 here for us. Also, what's interesting about this is not only does it talk about the victims of the massacre, it also talks about the offender in terms of how he was treated by the Norway criminal justice system. So read about that case. It's super interesting. All right, so we're going to be looking at crime and victim databases. You're probably familiar with a lot of these from some of your other classes. Measurements of crime, probably the gold standard is the Uniform Crime Report and the incident-based system. We also have things like prisoner statistics and court surveys. And we have measurements of victimization that are victimization surveys. So there's a couple of different ones that we will talk about. So let's first start talking about the Uniform Crime Report, which is the gold standard in crime databases. This was created by the FBI in 1931. And the advantage is data are compiled annually from all over the United States. And we have a ton of different law enforcement agencies that give their data to the FBI every year. So it's not just a few police departments, it's a lot of police departments. It did standardize crime definitions. We do have a lot of information that is collected from police departments and law enforcement agencies all over the United States. Here is the Uniform Crime Report website. I absolutely suggest you take a look at this. You can actually tabulate statistics on any type of crime that you like. They also put out yearly reports. You can see that they have all of these different reports. So it's a really interesting and super helpful website. So go ahead and take a look at the Uniform Crime Report website. And it also includes the National Incident-Based Reporting System, which I'll get to in a minute. All right, the disadvantages, statistics are for reported crimes only. Remember, we've talked about that dark figure of crime. The Uniform Crime Report only includes those crimes that are actually reported to the police. Data only includes the most serious crime incidents. This is called the hierarchy rule. So if somebody commits, for example, rape, robbery, and homicide all at the same time, only the homicide will be recorded. So the other crimes will not be recorded. So it doesn't give us a complete picture of crime if we're not including all of the crimes that were committed. Critics suggest the Uniform Crime Report underreports the true level of crime. There are a lot of people that had problems with the Uniform Crime Report. So the FBI in 1970 created the NIBRS, which was really kind of created to fill in some of the holes of the Uniform Crime Report. I'm going to go back to the Uniform Crime Report website because it also has a link to the NIBRS here. So you can actually go to the NIBRS, look at their reports, look at their statistics. It has a lot of great information. And a lot of people say the NIBRS is superior to the Uniform Crime Report, although the Uniform Crime Report is still the gold standard, but at least we have that in addition. So it was made based on the following limitations of the Uniform Crime Report. Statistics were maintained only on reported crimes and ignored unreported cases. Data could be incomplete and manipulated as a way for a city to boost its image. That is always a concern with the Uniform Crime Report or any official statistic where police departments and law enforcement agencies are voluntarily reporting their crime rates because they might want to not look bad. So they might not want to report as many crimes. Data were lacking regarding victims and offenders. The Uniform Crime Report really doesn't give us a lot of information about that. And data was only reported on those who were arrested. The collection of data on crimes known to the police, but the data are not aggregated. Data collected with the NIBRS has 53 different dimensions, including the specific offenses. We also get victim and offender characteristics here, types of property lost or recovered. So this one just gives us a little bit more information, not only about the offenses, but about the victim and the offender. So some of the advantages of the NIBRS: data collection is not restricted to the number of offense categories. The Uniform Crime Report only has Group A and Group B offenses. The NIBRS includes more offenses than the Uniform Crime Report. Details on individual crime incidents, so we get information about the offense, the offender, the victim, property, arrest. We get a lot more information. We get more information about arrest and clearance rates. With the Uniform Crime Report, we only get information about arrest. We don't get any information about how the case is going to be decided. Is the case going to court? Is somebody prosecuted for it? So we don't get a lot of information there. So just more information, no hierarchy rule, which is really important. So if somebody does commit robbery, rape, and homicide, all three of those will be recorded on the NIBRS. Now, your textbook also talks about some international databases. The Uniform Crime Report of Canada was established in 1962, designed to measure incidence of crime, and it's really kind of inspired by the Uniform Crime Report here in the United States. It includes the number of criminal incidents, the clearance rates, which is interesting, and the person charged information. So a lot more information about the person that is charged and whether or not that case is solved. In 1988, the Uniform Crime Report of Canada made some modification, includes incident-based survey, records micro-level data on victims, so it gives us more information about the victims. Now, why your textbook is talking about international databases is, there are a lot of times when we want to compare our crime rates to other countries. And so when we look at the types of databases other countries have, we can determine if it is helpful to compare. Sometimes there's a problem in the way that we record crimes and the way other countries record crimes. When we try to just compare official statistics, they might not match up, or it might not be a fair comparison. So that's why your textbook is talking a little bit about some of the international databases. Some of the challenges in the measurement of crime: definitional challenges, defining what a specific crime is. What is aggravated assault? And again, when we're comparing, especially international, what is aggravated assault here in the United States as opposed to Canada or as opposed to England? We talked about that hierarchy rule. We talked about reporting challenges in terms of that dark figure of crime, people not always reporting crime. And remember, the Uniform Crime Report only includes those who are actually reported to the police. And then policing practices. Is the report considered a crime? Do the police, report everything? Do they report everything that they encounter to these databases? And the answer to that is no. Not all police report every single incident, because there's a lot of discretion with policing in terms of what they report. And then policing practices. Reports to any official database is going to vary due to the response time to the call, the level of professionalism, policing styles, arrest practices, and again, whether or not that police department really wants, the picture of crime in their city to be reflected with their crime rates. There's a lot of pressure with cities in terms of trying to make their cities look like they have low crime rates to get people to move there, to get people to visit there. So that's always something that you have to kind of keep in mind, because people are voluntarily reporting their arrest rates and incidents that are reported to the police. They're reporting those things voluntarily. Now, we also have things that are based on surveys. So the National Prison Statistic Program was created to determine the physical capacity, staffing, and program needs of prison facilities to identify and analyze major issues and trends in corrections related to facilities, such as influence of sentence patterns on occupancy. Remember, our prisons are, most of them are either at capacity or over capacity. So really understanding what is going on inside a prison in terms of how many people are there, what is the capacity, what is staffing, that's really helpful. To obtain information on special issues like the number of inmates, deaths related to HIV infection, the number of inmates who are legal aliens, the number of inmates who have mental health issues, the number of inmates that have other medical issues. The data collection there's two aspects to it. There's a census and a survey. The census requires the participation of every single prison and correctional facility in the United States. And then the survey includes a representative sample of facilities and a random sample of inmates drawn from those sample facilities. Now, there's a table that explains that to you in the textbook. But basically, it means we have all of our prison facilities included in the census data, and then we don't have the ability to survey every single person in every single facility. So we create a random sample where we survey a certain number of facilities and a certain number of inmates from those samples. Adult Criminal Court Survey, this is one out of Canada, a database of statistical information on the appearance, charges, and cases in the adult criminal court system in Canada. The survey includes age and gender of the accused, case decision patterns, sentencing information, amount of fine, and what the disposition of the case is, how many years is somebody going to be getting for if they are found guilty. Challenges in measuring crime and prisoner data, limited to inmates or those who appear in court for that particular survey. It's only those who are going through the court system, not the people who are already in prison. Only a select sample is represented, but that's true of any survey that you do. But you could suggest that there's a lack of sufficient data if you have a small sample size. Because of that, they suggest you can't make general conclusions regarding crime and victimization because you are not surveying every person that's charged with the crime and every victim. And it's always going to be an issue when you talk about surveys and sample sizes. Victim surveys, these are when we do interviews with a random sample of people asking if they have ever been a victim of crime. These are typically done over the phone, today they might be done through email. And the interesting thing about victim surveys is that they can include crime that is not reported to the police. So a lot of people think that we get a better picture of crime by doing these kind of victim surveys because they include all of that dark figure of crime that is not reported to the police. So it may give us a better estimate of overall risk of becoming a victim, because victimization surveys also give us a lot of information about the victim. It can help us to monitor trends in crime over time. It can help us identify risk factors for becoming a victim. It can help us understand the long-term outcomes of crime on victims. So are they suffering from depression? Are they suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder? Are they having trouble sleeping, eating? Are they having suicidal thoughts? Are they having trouble working? All of these things. We can get a better picture of the impact of crime. Advantages of victim surveys in measuring crime. Here are some of the advantages. It can give us information on crimes not committed or even not reported to the police. It can help us develop theories on crime, especially things like you'll read about these theories as we go through the course, but routine activity theories suggest that, certain routine activities that people do or certain habits that people do put them at risk, or maybe their occupation puts them at risk for being a victim of crime. Of course, it gives us an understanding of the consequences of crime. It can help us to know who needs help, so mobilize our responses. Again, building theories, gives us more information about the victim in general in terms of age, gender, socioeconomic status, all kinds of background information, and also information on the offender as well. So when it comes to the victim surveys that we use here in the United States, the first generation of victim surveys was developed in the mid-1960s based on the President's Commission on Crime. The NORC surveyed 10,000 households and asked them to report on incidents of crime in the past year. So basically, they would call people up and say, have you been the victim of a crime in the past year? And then they would go on to ask questions. If the answer was yes, ask the questions about the specific victimization. And by the way, doing these kind of surveys suggested that crime was underreported by about 50%. If you compare the number of people that said they were the victim of a particular type of crime on one of these surveys to the Uniform Crime Report, and you see that they aren't adding up. We have more people that are suggesting they were, or that were saying they were the victim of a crime, and the Uniform Crime Report doesn't reflect that. It suggests that we have a lot of crime that is not reported to the police. So that's really what this first generation of surveys told us. Not everything is reported to the police. The second generation sought to correct problems identified in the first round of surveys, doing record checks, comparing data with those police records, with the Uniform Crime Report, doing reverse record checks, finding victims' names and police reports and contacting them for a survey, and then a forward record check, asking people in the survey if they contacted the police about the incident. So that also gives us a good idea of who did and who didn't report the incident to the police. And by the way, the surveys today, if somebody says they didn't report it to the police, it asks why. So it also today gives us more information about why people may not report crime to the police. The third generation was initiated in 1972 with a probability sample of 72,000 households. So now we have a higher sample size, and we contacted them more often. So now it's every 6 months. And we're contacting the same households every 6 months for a total of 7 interviews. Many of the concerns from the first and second generation survey were addressed and corrected in this stage. And then the fourth generation concerns were addressed again about wording, bounding, memory decay, etc., sample size, contacting every 6 months. So the redesign efforts were made to address questionnaire development and the data collection procedures. The fourth generation victim survey included the widely used National Crime Victim Survey, which was officially adopted in 1990, and is the current one that we use today. So the National Crime Victim Survey is the one that we use today, and it evolved out of all of those early surveys, has developed detailed information about the victims and the consequences of crime, which is, we really want to know about the victims and the impact that crime has on them. Estimate the number and types of crimes that are not reported to the police. So again, it gives us a better picture of crime because we are tapping into that dark figure of crime. And it allows us to compare things over time. The Uniform Crime Report and the NIBRS do that as well. But these surveys, along with other types of data, allow us to see trends in crime over time. And we still believe that underreporting is a problem, particularly in crime categories like sexual crimes, sexual assaults on adults and children. Here are some general findings from 2015 from the National Crime Victim Survey. Gender: men were less likely than women to be victims of violent crime. Men were more likely to be victims of serious violent crime. Age: persons aged 65 and older had the lowest rate of violent victimization. Race of victimization based on race: African Americans, 22.6% per 1,000 people in the population, meaning African Americans have higher rates of violent victimization. Caucasians, 17.4%, Hispanic, 16.8%, and person of other races, 25.7%. Location, rate of violent victimization was higher in the nation's western states and cities, which is interesting because a lot of people think, statistically speaking, that the South has the highest rate of violent victimization. So these surveys were really interesting, suggesting that western states and cities, particularly those on the West Coast, have higher victimization rates. The National Family Violence Survey, another survey that is given to people to see if anyone in their family, they or anyone in their family, has been the victim of a violent crime, considers physical assault, psychological assault, slightly higher rates of violence committed by women than men. There's a lot of discrepancies between these various surveys. I would suggest that the National Crime Victim Survey, this one, because it has been around so long and because it has such a large sample size, probably is getting the most accurate results. Factors contributing to different incident rates of violence against women. It could be the sample population. It could be the number of times that they were interviewed, the context of the survey, the number of household members interviewed, the context of the violence, and you can read all about those things. But kind of really depends on how you're asking the question and who you're asking. But most surveys, most official statistics, depending on the type of crime, find a lot of crime against women when it comes to like domestic assault, of course, and sexual assaults. We have women that are at higher rates of victimization in those categories. The Canadian General Social Survey, again, talking about international surveys as we compare our victim surveys to other countries. Aboriginal people as victims and offenders is included in that, and that's Aborigines people who are minorities in Canada. Crime prevention includes crime prevention measures taken by Canadians. Looks at family violence in Canadian households, so it's going to ask about family violence. It does include information and asking questions on hate-motivated crimes. It asks information on seniors as victims. That's super important. Especially today, since we have a large number of people that are moving into old age with the baby boomers. Looking at minorities as crime, looking at victimization in the workplace, looking at bias-based crimes that are based on sexual orientation, and violence against women. So big survey with a lot of different topics. The British Crime Survey, face-to-face survey of people in England and Wales. Respondents are asked if they have been the victim of crime in the past 12 months, and crimes are divided up into personal and household offenses. Also collects data regarding public attitudes towards the police, the criminal justice system, crime, and antisocial behavior in general. So not only does it get information about criminal behavior, but about public perception as well, which is very interesting. International Crime Victim Survey, respondents have to be older than the age of 16, and they are asked whether or not they've been the victim of a crime in the previous year. Their crime experiences in the past 5 years. So not only are we getting information, have they been a victim that year, but have they had any victimization in the past 5 years? Also looks at concern and fear about crime, attitudes toward police, and recommendations for fair sentencing. So not, again, like the British Crime Survey, not only are we getting information about their individual victimization, but also public perception about crime. Challenges in measurement of victimization. There's always going to be a challenge when you have random sampling, because when you have random sampling, you're not sampling every single person that has been victimized. But, when you have millions of people in any given country, you can't sample every single person in that country. So you have to kind of keep that in mind with any type of survey. Victim responses. Well, number one, do they remember it? Human memory is not like a recording device. And number two, not everybody wants to talk about or tell somebody that they've been the victim of a crime, especially if it is a sexually based crime, if it is a domestic or a family violence type of crime. Not everybody wants to talk about that or tell somebody about that. Telescoping, when a respondent includes events from before the reference period. Repeated victimizations can be dealt with by bounding, but again, we don't really have a lot of information depending on how you ask the question about repeated victimization. That's especially important when it comes to like domestic issues. Victim knowledge that a crime has been committed. A lot of people don't know that they have been victimized, or they're not educated. And I know that's probably hard to believe, but not everybody understands what a crime is, especially when it comes to like sexual assault. Married women, for example, might feel that even if they've been forced by their spouse to have sex, they might feel, well, I'm married, and so that is not a crime. That is a crime. Anytime you say no, whether you're married or not, that means that you have been victimized. You are a victim of sexual assault if you said no and you were forced against your will. A lot of college age women don't report crime or don't know that they've been victimized, or they feel that it's not a crime because they were drinking, or because they participated in some of the sexual activity and then said stop, but were forced to complete it. And they believe, since they participated or that they were drinking, that it wasn't actually a crime, when it is a crime. Again, anytime you say no, no means no. Or they might have been drinking and don't really remember what happened. You cannot and think, well, okay, I was drinking, and so I really don't remember it all, so it can't be a crime. People who are legally drunk cannot give legal consent. So those kinds of things can affect whether or not somebody kind of perceives what happened to them as a crime. And if they don't perceive it as a crime, they're not going to report it as a crime. With data interpretation, this is doing all the statistical aspect once the information has been collected. You might have, and it really, if you've taken statistics, you know that statistics can be done in a number of different ways. So how are they doing the statistics? Are the way that they are doing the statistics inflating? Are they accurate? We want the data to be, and the statistics to be, as accurate and fair as possible, because it can affect changes in legislation. It can affect changes in how we fund victims programs. It can affect how we create prevention programs. So we just want to make sure that the interpretation of data collected from any survey is going to be accurate, an accurate reflection, and fair. Most government agencies are going to be very careful about being fair in their statistics, and are going to not going to try to artificially inflate anything or use unfair statistical practices. All right, so I encourage you to visit some of the websites: the Uniform Crime Report, the NIBRS. You can visit the National Crime Victim Survey. Go ahead and read the chapter. It has a lot more in-depth information than I was able to hit on here. And if you have any questions about anything that we talked about, please let me know. Otherwise, have a